Hello, I'm a first year medical student currently studying in the UK. I'm just making this video on ovarian embryology because I struggle with embryology and I hope me doing this will help my own revision and hopefully help someone out there. But just please let me know if I've made any mistakes down below and mind my pronunciation because there are a lot of difficult words in medicine. So basically, sexual cycles are controlled by the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus is in our brain, and it basically is one of the structures within our skull in the brain, and that basically secretes gonadotropin releasing hormone, which later on secretes, which basically leads on to the secretion of gonadotropins. The reason it leads on to the secretion of gonadotropins is because gonadotropin releasing hormone acts on the cells of the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, which then causes a release of gonadotropins. Now, what are they? They're basically, you might have heard of FSH or LH when you were learning about the menstrual cycle in GCSE science. So FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone, and LH stands for luteinizing hormone. I don't know how you pronounce it, but yeah, it's written down there. And FSH is quite the most important one. So it occurs near the start of the ovarian cycle, and 15 to 20 primary follicles are stimulated to grow under the influence of FSH. And only one reaches full maturity. So another thing that you should be aware of about the FSH is that it also stimulates the maturation of follicular, also known as granulosa cells surrounding the oocyte. Anyway, so when a follicle becomes atretic, the oocyte and surrounding follicular cells degenerate and are replaced by connective tissue, forming a corpus atreticum. Now, what do these words mean? Corpus is basically from the word corpse, which means like, a dead being, but in this case, dead cells. And atretic basically means that the follicle denatured before it was able to reach maturity. So yeah, you just need to remember these terminologies when talking about this in your exams. Well, I'll try to do that in my exams as well. But yeah, so proliferation of follicular cells is mediated by growth differentiation factor 9. That's just a fact you got to remember. So now we're going to be talking about estrogen production in ovarian cycle. So there are 5 major things to remember. So the first point that I wrote down is granular cells convert these hormones to estrogen and 17-beta estradiol. Apologies, apparently I don't know how to spell estrogen, and I literally missed out letters, so that's bad, but yeah, there's nothing else I can say about that. But this point is basically talking about how the granular cells, they respond to FSH, and they basically convert like androgens to estrogens, and the more specific type of estrogen is specifically the 17-beta estradiol. So the next point is the anterior lobe of pituitary gland is stimulated to release LH. This is mentioned at the very start of the video when we talked about gonadotropin releasing hormones, which act on the cells of the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, which then leads to the secretion of gonadotropins. Now, the two type of gonadotropins is the LH and FSH that we've mentioned in this video. Thinning of cervical mucus occurs to allow passage of sperm. So basically, estrogen production. Estrogen is what regulates the secretion of cervical mucus, and especially closer to the time of ovulation and at the time of ovulation, the cervical mucus production will be at its highest, and after ovulation, the quantity of it will begin to decline, and it will become thicker in consistency, making it a less fertile environment. So theca interna produces androstenedione, however you pronounce that. And this is because theca interna has receptors on its cells for LH, so that's sort of what stimulates it. And androstenedione is can be an intermediate in the biosynthesis of testosterone, but theca interna does not directly produce testosterone. Now, how is this exactly linked to estrogen production? The reason because is when there's this like surge in estrogen levels, it's gonna exert a positive feedback on the hypothalamus, specifically the pituitary gland where the LH are produced, and theca interna cells have receptors for the LH, which then will trigger the production of androstenedione, if that makes sense. So, as a result of all of this and the estrogen production, the uterine endometrium enters the follicular or proliferative phase, which is basically the second phase in which the estrogen causes the lining of the uterus to grow. At mid-cycle, there is a surge of LH that does three things. So the first thing it does is it elevates the concentration of maturing promoting factors, and therefore this would lead to the cause of the oocyte to complete meiosis 1 and start meiosis 2. Second thing it does is it stimulates the production of progesterone by follicular stromal cells. And the final third thing it does is it causes the follicular rupture and ovulation. So I'm just going to start annotating this diagram. I've kind of missed a bit of the drawing, so I just finished that. So there's the androgen, which is the white inside bit, the theca interna, which is the yellow bit surrounding in both the two diagrams. Granulosa is the bluish bit, and once it opens and breaks, it becomes a theca externa, and you can see the thing that's this little cell that's being released of vesicle. It contains there's an actual Latin name for it, I just can't remember it now, but yeah, that little red circle, it contains the first polar body, and it shows how the oocyte is in the second meiotic division, and the grey things are cumulus euphorus cells. Now the third diagram shows you how the corpus luteum have like kind of shrunken up and has little fibrils in between. So I'm just going to go through the steps in detail now. So stage 1 is mature vesicular follicle. So basically in this stage they are under the influence of FSH and LH, and the vesicular follicle grows rapidly to become mature. Coincident with the final development of the vesicular follicle, there is an abrupt increase in LH. Therefore, the primary oocyte completes meiosis 1 and is able to start meiosis 2, as shown in the diagram. However, oocyte is arrested in metaphase for approximately 3 hours before ovulation. The surface of the ovary begins to bulge, and at the apex, which is basically the avascular spot, the stigma appears. There's a high concentration of LH, which basically means there's a high activity of collagenase, which results in the digestion of collagen fibers surrounding the follicle. There's also a high prostaglandin in response to the surge of LH, which causes local muscular contractions in the ovarian wall. Stage number 2 is ovulation. So during this, the contraction forces out the oocyte, which together with its surrounding granulosa cells from the region of the cumulus euphorus breaks free. So this is basically ovulation now, and it floats out. Some of the cumulus euphorus cells then rearrange themselves around the zona pellucida to form corona radiata. So that's a lot of Latin words. Let me just explain what they mean. Zona pellucida is basically the thick membrane that surrounds the ovum before implantation, and cumulus euphorus is basically just a cluster of cells that surrounds the oocyte in the ovarian follicle and after ovulation. And the innermost layer of this is known as corona radiata. So the third stage is corpus luteum. So that's the brown little drawing on the side, and basically this secretes estrogens, progesterone, which causes the uterine mucosa to enter the progestational or secretory stage in preparation for implantation. So the role depends on if basically the egg gets fertilized or not. So hypertrophy is due to the accumulation of the lipid granulosa and theca interna cells. I think if you guys want like another video a bit more in depth about gametogenesis and fertilization and etc., just let me know and I can just try and make a bit more detailed video with more Latin words. So now we'll be talking about oocyte transport. So before ovulation, fimbriae of the uterine sweep over the ovary and is transferred into the tube. Now, this basically, fimbriae is like the finger-like projections of the uterine tube. So uterine tube is basically also known as fallopian tube. Different words means the same thing. So the uterine tube is not directly connected to the ovaries. There's no direct connection to it. There's just the finger-like projections, which are the fimbriae, that sweep over trying to catch the oocytes. The tube itself begins to contract rhythmically, and it is thought that once the oocyte is in the tube, the cumulus cells withdraw from cytoplasmic processes from the zona pellucida and lose contact with the oocyte. Again, this is just a presumption that's being made. There's still, scientific experiments and so on going on, so it's not confirmed. Once oocyte is in the uterine tube, it is propelled by peristaltic muscular contractions of the tube and by cilia in the tubule mucosa. The rate of transport, as long as regulation, is determined by the endocrine status. Human fertilized oocytes take about 3 to 4 hours to reach uterine lumen. Well done for making it this far into the video. Now we're on the final part, which is Corpus Albicans. More Latin. If fertilization doesn't occur, then this is what will happen. Basically, corpus luteum reaches the maximum development it can, which is approximately 9 days after ovulation. This can be easily recognized as yellow projection on the surface of the ovary. So following this, corpus luteum shrinks due to luteolysis, which is the degeneration of lutein cells, and form a fibrotic scar tissue, which is corpus albicans. So remember the third step of ovulation in the previous section before. So the ending of it shows us how, if it doesn't undergo ovulation, so the corpus luteum from before will shrink because of the degeneration of the lutein cells, and it will form a fibrotic scar tissue, which is Corpus Albicans, which is the title of this little section. So this means that there will be a decrease in progesterone production, and that is why we have menstrual bleeding. So precipitating menstrual bleeding commences. So now this will be a different story if fertilization did occur. So if fertilization does occur, then the human chorionic gonadotropin will prevent the luteolysis. So what does this mean? This means that the corpus luteum won't be shrinking, and there won't be the degeneration of the lutein cells, so corpus albicans would not be formed. Instead, the corpus luteum will grow to form corpus luteum of pregnancy. Now, at the end of the 3rd month, this will be around 1/3 to 1/2 of the size of the ovary. The yellowish luteal cells will continue to secrete progesterone until the end of the 4th month. Afterwards, there will be a reduced amount of secretion as the trophoblastic part of placenta becomes sufficient for maintenance of pregnancy. The removal of corpus luteum before 4 months is basically known as abortion. So that is all. Thank you very much for watching. Please do comment down below if I have made any mistakes. I'm only in first year, so I'm still learning. And let me know if there's things you did or did not like, because again, this is like only the first video, so I'm not really sure if I'm going to post like any more or not. I want to see if this actually works as a revision method for myself as well. So yes, and thank you.